All right, so let's demo a little bit what you're going to be working on this week. So the server. Oh no! Wait, do I have something running? Oh, okay. The server that I'm providing already has some of the code for a lot of the data models, the RESTful services, the repositories, and again, you're free to use as much or as little as you want. And an implementation might look something like this, right? You navigate to the admin page, and you can list all the users, the details for a particular user, all the services, or a particular service. Go and fetch and retrieve that, all the categories, or be able to retrieve a particular category, frequently asked questions, details, answers, and answer details. Okay. So it might look something as simple as this, right? But each one is going to be working on their own little thing. Right? So different teams are going to be working on different screens, and obviously we're not going to finish all of them. Right? We're only going to have maybe get 2/3 of the way of implementing all the screens. Right? But as we go, we'll deal with some of the other ones a little later. So I just wanted to illustrate how you might go about implementing something. Right? So let's start with another screen that is not in your assignment, and so you can follow along and perhaps implement yours. Okay? All right, so let's see. Let me create a, let me remove, I'm going to delete a table here, since that's the one I'm going to create in a minute. All right, so I'm going to work on modeling the quotes. Right? If you remember, quotes were quotes that providers gave to their clients. Right? If a client might say, "Hey, can you come and clean my house every Friday?" Right? The provider might say, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it for $200, and I'll come in every Friday and clean your house." So that somewhere we need to log the fact that this quote has been requested and has been provided, and somebody has acknowledged it and agreed to the quote. So let's just create really simple some data model for quotes. Let's see, we'll have a Java data model for being able to keep track of these quotes, and the quote might be maybe perhaps might have a string that describes the job description. I'll have maybe a job title. Maybe I have the price. Okay, let's just keep it simple. Let's just keep those three things, and we're going to declare this as a primary key. Okay. Now to convert this into a data model that we can map it to a relational database, we're going to decorate it with entity. Entity is going to decorate this and say, oh, this is actually going to map to a table. Right? By default, the name of the table will be based on the name of the class. Typically, just quote, the table will be just plain old quote in lowercase. Right? But we can override that and say that no, instead, the name of the table that I want is with a different decorator, and I can decorate it as quotes in plural. Everybody okay? Right. The next thing is that I need to specify the field that is going to be used as a unique identifier, and it's going to be this ID over here, and we're going to say that this is going to an ID, so that tells our JPA, our Java Persistence API, to use that ID field as our primary key, and that I don't want to have to create this myself. I'm going to delegate this to the relational database to do this for me. So I'm going to say that this is actually a generated value, and that the database should use the following strategy to generate these fields. Use the identity, meaning Different databases will deal differently with this configuration. Most of them will just start at 1 and then will indefinitely increment this ID 2, 3, 4. Some of them will start at 10, 20, 30, 40. It depends. Each database is configured slightly different. Everybody okay? Right. And finally, we're going to create the setters and getters that go along with this. Let me stop this maybe. And let's generate the setters and getters for this. When is not able to the current selection. Quote. Select a field which is not declared as type variable. What? All right, there it is. Select all. ID, get. Very good. I'll say OK. There we go. So we have all the fields, and somehow it moved these to the wrong place. There we go. All right, so this is enough to create the table for us. If we restart the server, this should send a create statement to the, there it is. There's my create statement. Right, that creates the table for me, and I should create it here for in my SQL file here. What branch am I working on? Git status. Uh-oh. I should never work in master. Right? You should create a branch. Right? You can lose points for that. So check out -b. I'll say this is lecture. And so, all right, so I'm in there, and I would create the table that goes along with that. All right, so I would add it here. I'm not going to do that. All right, so I did that, and so I'm ready to commit this. I can say git status git at git commit added quote entity. The next thing we're going to do is perhaps create the repository. So we'll do the create a new class and call this the quote repository. So this is the file that's going to be responsible for shuttling data back and forth from Java to our relational database. And so to do that, we're going to have to decorate. We're going to have to. This actually it's an interface, not a class. Interface. To achieve this, we're going to extend a CRUD repository, meaning that it's already going to give us some dummy implementation of the CRUD operations: delete, save, find all, find by ID. All those are already implemented for us. It just needs configuration. It needs to do, well, what do you want me to CRUD? I'll say, well, I want you to CRUD quote instances, and the primary key is an integer. Okay, that's actually enough. That's actually enough. But let's go on and create a couple of queries. We'll probably need something to be able to retrieve all the quotes. All right, so this will be find all quotes and public find a single quote if I know the ID of the quote. Yes? Everybody okay? So how do we implement that? We're gonna tell JPA exactly the query you want it to use to go and fetch these things from the database. Right? The query, we're gonna decorate this function. It says query. We say use the following query. You're gonna do a select quote from quote. Right? This is not actually SQL. It's a little higher level SQL. It's an object-oriented SQL. Right? Notice that this is not the actual name of the table. The table is called quotes. Right? So we're using a slightly higher level SQL, which is object-oriented. Here's another one. What about the second one over here? The second one is retrieve the quote where the ID is equal to a placeholder ID. Right? And where do you read that placeholder? From this input field here. So I'm going to decorate this as a parameter and give it the name ID. to map this ID here, to map it to the parameter ID, to map it these two things. Everybody okay? Are you still with me? All right. All right, so pretty much done there. So we're going to say git add, git status, git add, git commit, added, quote, repository. So we'll be looking for these kinds of commits, right, in the source control, right, that you've been logging as you go, right? So TAs are going to be looking for these things. Right. All right, so we have the repository, and we have the quote. Now we'll need a service to expose this data model. All right, so let's do that. In the service, we'll create a service quote, a quote service. So this will be quote service, and in the service, we're going to say what we'd like to be able to do is expose some of that data that we are going to have in the database and expose it through the functions that are basically the same as we had in the repository, right? We have public list quote find all quotes, same functions, but a different world, right? This is whereas the repository is an interface between two worlds, the Java world and the database world. This one is an interface between the HTTP world and the Java world. Make sense? Right? The two, basically are interfaces between two separate worlds. Right? And then we have also public quote find quote by ID, and it takes us integer ID. All right. Now, where is this going to retrieve it from? It's going to retrieve it from the repository we just built, right? From the quote repository, right? We need to instantiate it. So typically, we don't want to have to instantiate it ourselves. Instead, we're going to ask the infrastructure to instantiate it for us. We're going to say that we're going to auto-wire this, auto-wired, meaning Java, please instantiate it and then inject it and associate it with this variable here. I don't want to have to instantiate it myself. So there will be a singleton instance of this thing in the entire application. And then the final quotes would just use the repository to find all quotes, right? And same thing with find quote by ID. We'll take the ID as an argument. Everybody okay? And this is a return, obviously. Yes? Right? Now, this is all and good, but within a Java world, some Java class is calling this Java class, but we don't really want to do that. We want folks outside our Java class to be able to call this, right? So to do that, we're going to have to expose this as a RESTful service, right? And then map these functions to HTTP GET methods, right? So we're going to map them to GET mappings and map this to API quotes to retrieve all the quotes and map the other one to retrieve a particular quote by its ID. And that ID is going to be used as, I'm going to pass this ID as part of the path. I'm going to pass it to this integer here by parsing the path variable called ID and then map it to this integer parameter. Everybody okay? Right? All right, so let's restart the server. Let's see if we broke something. It doesn't look like we broke anything. So we should be able to hit that now. Local 8080/API/quotes. And right now it comes back as an empty array because there are no quotes in the database, right? But it's promising. If we go to a database and refresh the database, notice that we have quotes, and indeed it's empty. There's nothing there, right? So let's just create a couple of things, right? So clean my house, right? Walk the dogs. So we added a couple things in there. If we refresh this, notice that indeed we are able to retrieve the those records. Make sense? Right? And we can also retrieve an individual record if we know the ID, 1 or 2. Okay? Right? So that was last week. That was last week, implementing RESTful services, JPA, and all that. Right? This week is you're welcome to use the code that I already gave you to finish up your RESTful services, right? And focus now on the front end side. Right, so let's look at the front end now for a little bit.